I never expected to return from my month-long expedition in Alaska to find someone else living in my cabin. But that's exactly what happened when Patricia Henderson decided she had the authority to seize my property. The moment I pulled into the gravel driveway of my mountain retreat outside Boone, North Carolina, I knew something was terribly wrong. There were unfamiliar curtains in my windows, a different welcome mat on my porch, and worst of all, my locks had been changed. My name is William Ortiz, and I'd owned this cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains for 8 years. It was my sanctuary, the place I escaped to whenever city life in Charlotte became too suffocating. I'd spent countless weekends here, fixing up the place with my own 2 hands, adding a new deck, refinishing the floors, and building custom shelving in every room. This wasn't just a property to me. It was home. I tried my key in the front door and it didn't work. Confused and increasingly angry, I walked around to the back door and found the same problem. Every lock had been replaced. Through the windows, I could see that my furniture had been moved around, and there were personal items that definitely weren't mine scattered across the coffee table. My phone rang just as I was considering breaking a window. It was my neighbor, Frank, who lived about half a mile down the mountain road. "William, you back?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Yeah, just got here. Frank, what the hell happened to my cabin?" "That HOA woman happened. Patricia Henderson. She's been up here 3 times in the past 2 weeks with some maintenance crew. Said something about the property being abandoned and falling into disrepair, which is complete garbage. Your place has always been immaculate." I felt my blood pressure rising. What HOA? I never signed up for any homeowners association. "That's what I told her," Frank said. "But she had all these papers, claimed the whole development was under HOA jurisdiction now. She's been going around to all the cabins, taking photos, writing violations. Most folks ignored her, but when you weren't here to respond to her notices, she escalated things real fast. Where is she now?" "Probably at your place. She moved herself in about 4 days ago. Said she was going to rehabilitate the property and then sell it to recover unpaid fees." "William, I called you 5 times, but you were up in the wilderness with no cell service." "I'm going to fix this right now," I said, ending the call. I marched back to the front door and pounded on it with my fist. "Open up. This is my property and you're trespassing." After a moment, the door swung open, and I came face to face with Patricia Henderson for the first time. She was exactly what I'd expected. A woman in her early 50s with an aggressive platinum blonde bob, too much makeup, and an expression of absolute entitlement plastered across her face. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that looked ridiculously out of place in the mountains and held a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Excuse me," she said in a voice dripping with false sweetness. "Can I help you? You can help me by getting out of my cabin right now. I don't know who you think you are, but this is my property and you've committed breaking and entering." She actually laughed. "Your property? I don't think so." This cabin was seized by the Mountainside Estates Homeowners Association 3 weeks ago due to repeated violations and unpaid fees totaling $8,400. I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the HOA board, and I'm currently occupying this residence as part of the rehabilitation process. "I never joined any HOA," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I bought this cabin 8 years ago, and there was no mention of any association in my deed or closing documents." "Then you didn't read the fine print," she replied smugly. "The HOA was established 5 years ago by a majority vote of property owners in this development. All properties within the boundary lines are automatically included. You've been sent multiple notices over the years. I never received any notices. That's not my problem. Ignorance of the rules doesn't exempt you from following them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm very busy cataloging the violations in this property so we can begin repairs. She started to close the door. I put my hand on the door, stopping it. You're not closing this door. This is breaking and entering, and I'm calling the sheriff right now. Go ahead, she said, completely unfazed. I have all the legal documentation right here. The HOA has the authority to seize properties for unpaid fees and violations. It's all in the bylaws, which were properly filed with Watauga County. You'll find the sheriff very sympathetic to our position. She actually managed to close the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, stunned by the sheer audacity of this woman. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher put me through to a deputy, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. The deputy, a man named Garrett, said he'd send someone out within the hour. I sat in my truck, fuming, watching my own cabin like I was some kind of stranger. True to his word, Sheriff Deputy Marcus Reeves arrived about 45 minutes later in his tan and brown cruiser. He was a tall man in his mid-40s with a weather-beaten face and the kind of calm demeanor that came from years of dealing with mountain disputes. "Mr. Ortiz," he asked, approaching my truck. "That's me." I got out and shook his hand. "Thanks for coming out. Tell me what's going on here." I explained everything. My month in Alaska, coming home to find my locks changed, Patricia Henderson claiming she'd seized my property through HOA authority. Deputy Reeves listened carefully, taking notes. "You have your deed?" he asked. "In my truck." I grabbed my important documents folder as soon as I realized what was happening. I retrieved the folder and showed him the deed, which clearly listed me as the sole owner with no mention of any HOA. "And you say you never received any notices from this association?" "Nothing." "I check my mail regularly. I have a P.O. box in Boone that I check every time I come up, which is usually every other weekend. I've never seen anything from an HOA." Deputy Reeves nodded. "Wait here." He walked to the front door and knocked. Patricia answered almost immediately, as if she'd been watching from the window. "Deputy Reeves," she said warmly. "Thank you for coming. I assume you're here about the trespasser who was harassing me earlier." "Madam, I need to see your documentation that gives you authority to be in this residence." Her smile faltered slightly. "Of course, come in." "I'll stay out here, madam. Just bring the papers to the door." She disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick folder. "Here's the HOA bylaws, filed with the county. Here's the property boundary map showing this cabin is within our jurisdiction. Here's the violation notices we sent to Mr. Ortiz's mailing address. And here's the seizure order signed by the HOA board 3 weeks ago." Deputy Reeves examined each document carefully. I couldn't see his face, but his body language suggested he wasn't impressed. "Madam, what address did you send these notices to?" "The address on file with the county tax assessor. 847 Ridge View Lane." "That's this cabin's address," Deputy Reeves said. "Do you have proof these notices were delivered?" "Well, no. We don't pay for certified mail for routine notices. That would be prohibitively expensive." "So you have no proof Mr. Ortiz ever received these notices?" "He's required to check the physical mailbox at the property. If he doesn't, that's not our responsibility." "Madam, there's no mailbox at this property. The Postal Service doesn't deliver up here. Everyone uses P.O. boxes in town." Patricia's face reddened. "That's irrelevant. The notices were properly sent according to our bylaws." "And this seizure order," Deputy Reeves continued. "Did you go through the court system for this?" "We don't need to. The HOA bylaws give us the authority to seize properties for unpaid fees and violations. It's all legal." "Madam, in North Carolina, You can't just seize someone's property without a court order, even if you're an HOA. That's not how property law works. The bylaws specifically state, "Your bylaws don't override state law," Deputy Reeves said firmly. "And Mr. Ortiz has a deed showing he's the legal owner of this property. You've changed his locks and moved into his cabin without his permission and without a court order. That's breaking and entering and potentially home invasion." "This is ridiculous," Patricia sputtered. "I have every right to be here." "No, madam, you don't. I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and vacate this property immediately." "I will do no such thing. I'll call my lawyer right now. You can't force me out without proper procedure." Deputy Reeves' expression hardened. "Madam, you're currently committing a crime. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to arrest you for criminal trespass." "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." "That doesn't put you above the law. You have 15 minutes to pack your essential items and leave." "Anything you can't pack in that time, Mr. Ortiz will store for you, and you can arrange to pick it up later with proper notice." Patricia's face had gone from red to purple. "This is harassment. I'm going to file a complaint against you and sue the county." "That's your right, madam. But right now, you need to pack your things." She slammed the door so hard the whole frame shook. Deputy Reeves walked back over to me. "This is a mess," he said quietly. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Ortiz. This kind of HOA dispute usually has to go through civil court. But she made a critical error by physically seizing your property without a court order. That crosses into criminal territory. So I can get back into my cabin. Once she's out, yes, but you'll want to document everything. Take photos, make lists of anything that's missing or damaged. And you're going to want to get a lawyer because she's likely to sue you in civil court over those supposed unpaid fees. I never joined this HOA. That's what you'll need to prove in court. These cases can get complicated. Sometimes developers include HOA covenants in deeds that people don't realize they're agreeing to. Sometimes HOAs form later and try to claim jurisdiction they don't actually have. You'll need a real estate lawyer to sort it out." Patricia emerged from the cabin 14 minutes later, dragging 2 large suitcases and carrying a designer purse that probably cost more than my truck. Her makeup was smudged now, and she looked furious. "I hope you're both happy," she spat. "The HOA board will be hearing about this, and we will take appropriate action." "Madam, I strongly suggest you consult with your lawyer before taking any further action regarding Mr. Ortiz's property," Deputy Reeves said. She threw her suitcases into the back of a white Mercedes SUV that I hadn't noticed parked on the side of the driveway. Without another word, she got in and peeled out, spraying gravel everywhere. "She seems pleasant," I said dryly. Deputy Reeves almost cracked a smile. "You'd be surprised how often I deal with HOA disputes up here. People move to the mountains for peace and quiet, and then they try to enforce the same suburban rules they had back in the city. Creates nothing but problems. Can I go in now? It's your property. But let me come with you and document the condition. If she's moved things around or damaged anything, I want it on record." We went inside together and my heart sank. Patricia hadn't just moved things around. She'd completely redecorated. My comfortable, masculine furniture had been shoved into corners or removed entirely. In their places were fussy white and cream pieces that looked like they belonged in a country chic magazine. My photos were gone from the walls, replaced by generic mountain landscape prints. The kitchen had been reorganized completely, with all my dishes and cookware stuffed haphazardly into cabinets. "Take photos of everything," Deputy Reeves advised. "Every room, every change." I spent the next hour documenting the invasion of my space. My bedroom was the worst. She'd removed my bed entirely. I later found it disassembled in the shed and replaced it with a white four-poster monstrosity with about 40 decorative pillows. My clothes had been shoved into garbage bags and thrown in the closet. "Where's my bed?" I asked out loud, incredulous. "We found it in pieces in the shed, along with my leather couch, my entertainment center, and several boxes of my personal belongings. Everything had been treated like garbage, tossed carelessly and covered with a tarp." "This is beyond trespassing," Deputy Reeves said, photographing everything with his phone. "This is destruction of property and theft. Those are criminal charges." "I want to press charges," I said firmly. "I figured you would. I'll file the report tonight. The prosecutor will review it and decide whether to move forward, but I'd say you've got a strong case." After Deputy Reeves left, I spent the rest of the daylight hours trying to put my cabin back together. I started with the bedroom, reassembling my bed frame and hauling the ridiculous four-poster out to the shed. Every room required hours of work to restore to something resembling normal. As I worked, I grew angrier and angrier at the violation of my space. Around 9 that evening, as I was rehanging my photos in the living room, someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find a thin man in his 60s wearing an apologetic expression. "Mr. Ortiz, I'm Donald Fraser. I own the cabin about a mile north of here. I heard what happened today, and I wanted to apologize." "You don't need to apologize unless you're part of this HOA," I said. "I'm on the board, but I voted against every action Patricia took regarding your property. The whole thing was illegal and insane, and I told her so repeatedly." I invited him in, and we sat at my kitchen table. Donald explained that the Mountainside Estates HOA had been formed 5 years ago by a group of newer property owners who wanted to maintain certain standards in the area. The original bylaws were fairly reasonable, basic guidelines about noise, trash disposal, and fire safety. But then Patricia got elected president 2 years ago, and she went power crazy, Donald said, shaking his head. Started writing up violations for everything. "Your grass is too long, your cabin color isn't approved, your firewood isn't stacked neatly enough. She's made life miserable for half the people up here. How did she even know about my cabin if I'm never at the meetings? She drives around with binoculars looking for violations. She saw your cabin sitting empty for a few weeks and assumed you'd abandoned it. When you didn't respond to her notices which she mailed to this address, knowing full well there's no mail delivery, she convinced 2 of the other board members to vote for seizure." "Is that even legal under your bylaws?" "No," Donald said flatly. "Our bylaws allow for liens, not seizures, and even liens require proper notification and court filing. Patricia just made up her own rules and convinced a couple of the newer, more gullible board members that she had the authority. I resigned from the board this afternoon in protest." "Good for you. This whole thing is insane." "There's something else you should know," Donald said, lowering his voice. "You're not the first person she's tried this with. About 6 months ago, she went after old Henry Patterson's cabin. He's 84 years old and was in the hospital for a month. She declared his property abandoned and tried to seize it. His daughter got a lawyer involved, and Patricia backed down, but not before she'd already changed his locks and stolen half his belongings." "Did he press charges?" "He was too sick and tired to fight. His daughter just wanted to get him into an assisted living facility without more stress. But you're younger and clearly willing to fight back. If you nail Patricia on this, you'll be a hero to half the mountain." Donald left around 10, and I finally had a chance to sit down and think about my next steps. I needed a lawyer, that was clear. I also needed to figure out if this HOA actually had any legitimate claim over my property. Tomorrow, I'd go into Boone and start making calls. I slept in my own bed that night, but it felt strange, like my cabin was contaminated by Patricia's presence. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smug face telling me this wasn't my property anymore. The next morning, I drove into Boone and went straight to the Watauga County Courthouse. I needed to see exactly what this HOA had filed and whether my deed had any covenants I'd missed. The clerk in the Register of Deeds office was a friendly woman named Marie who'd helped me with my original deed filing 8 years ago. "William, good to see you," she said. "What brings you in?" "I need to see everything filed related to the Mountainside Estates HOA and my property at 847 Ridgeview Lane." Her smile faded. "Oh no. Did Patricia Henderson get to you too? You know her. Everyone in this office knows her. She's in here once a week filing some new complaint or lien. Half of them we reject because they're not properly formatted or don't have the right signatures. She doesn't understand that you can't just file whatever you want." Marie pulled up the records on her computer and printed out several documents for me. The HOA bylaws had been filed 5 years ago, but the property boundary map they'd attached was vague and poorly drawn. My cabin was near the edge of what they claimed was HOA territory, but it wasn't definitively included. More importantly, my original deed had no HOA covenants attached to it. When I'd bought the cabin 8 years ago, there was no HOA in existence, and nothing in my purchase agreement mentioned future HOA obligations. "Can they retroactively claim jurisdiction over my property?" I asked. "Not without your consent," Marie said. "If an HOA forms after you buy your property, you have to voluntarily join it. They can't just declare your property is part of the association. Patricia seems to think that being president gives her unlimited power, but that's not how property law works. She filed a seizure order against my property. I know. I rejected it. She tried to file it as a deed transfer, but it didn't have any court documentation or your signature, so I sent it back. She was furious. Did she tell you she physically moved into my cabin while I was out of town?" Marie's eyes widened. "She did what?" I explained everything that had happened. Marie shook her head in disbelief. "That's criminal. You need to talk to the district attorney's office. This goes way beyond a civil dispute." I spent the next 2 hours at the courthouse, copying documents and talking to anyone who would listen. By the time I left, I had a thick folder of evidence showing that Patricia's seizure of my property was completely illegal and unfounded. My next stop was a law office on King Street. I'd looked up real estate attorneys while at the courthouse, and David Winters came highly recommended for property disputes. His office was in a renovated Victorian house, and his secretary got me in for a consultation that same afternoon. David Winters was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from winning a lot of cases. I laid out everything for him. The unauthorized HOA claim, the seizure, Patricia moving into my cabin, the changed locks, my furniture being thrown in the shed. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases of criminal trespass I've seen," he said, after reviewing my documents. "The fact that she claimed HOA authority doesn't give her any legal cover because the HOA has no legitimate jurisdiction over your property. You never joined, there are no covenants in your deed, and even if there were, they couldn't seize your property without a court order. What are my options? Criminally, that's up to the prosecutor. You filed a report, so they'll investigate and decide whether to press charges. Civilly, I recommend we file a lawsuit against both Patricia Henderson individually and the HOA for trespass, destruction of property, theft, and emotional distress. We'll also seek an injunction preventing the HOA from taking any further action against your property." How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $5,000. The good news is that if we win, which I'm very confident we will, you can recover your legal fees from the defendants. You might also be entitled to punitive damages given how egregious this behavior is. I wrote him a check and signed the retainer agreement. As I left his office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. David filed our lawsuit and got a temporary restraining order preventing Patricia or anyone from the HOA from coming onto my property. The restraining order was served to Patricia by the sheriff's office, and according to Deputy Reeves, she had a complete meltdown, screaming about her rights and threatening to sue everyone. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office reviewed my criminal complaint and decided to move forward with charges. Patricia was formally charged with criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and theft. A court date was set for 3 weeks out, but Patricia wasn't going down without a fight. 2 days after the charges were filed, she called an emergency HOA meeting and somehow convinced the remaining board members to authorize the HOA to pay for her legal defense. She also filed a countersuit against me, claiming I'd assaulted her when I put my hand on the door that first day, and that I owed the HOA $12,000 in back fees and fines. It's all garbage, David assured me. The assault claim won't go anywhere because Deputy Reeves witnessed the whole thing and will testify you never touched her. And the fees are bogus because you're not a member of the HOA. This is just her trying to muddy the waters and drain your resources. It's working. I'm exhausted. I know. But we're going to win this. The preliminary hearing for the criminal charges was set for early December. It was now late November, and Boone was getting its first serious snow. I'd been staying at the cabin full-time, partly because I wanted to protect my property and partly because I couldn't stand the thought of Patricia or anyone else messing with it while I was gone. On December 3rd, I drove down the mountain for the hearing. The courthouse was packed with people, many of whom I didn't recognize. Apparently, word had spread about the case, and half the mountain community had turned out to watch Patricia Henderson finally face consequences for her behavior. The prosecutor was a stern woman named Angela Morrison, who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Patricia showed up with an expensive-looking lawyer from Asheville, a slick man in a 3-piece suit who looked distinctly uncomfortable in the small-town courthouse. The hearing lasted about 2 hours. Deputy Reeves testified about what he'd witnessed, including Patricia's admission that she'd moved into my cabin without my permission. The prosecutor presented photos of the property, my deed, and the county clerk's testimony that my deed had no HOA covenants. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she'd been acting in good faith based on the HOA bylaws, but Judge Carolyn Pierce shut him down quickly. The bylaws of a homeowners association do not supersede North Carolina property law, Judge Pierce said firmly. Miss Henderson had no legal authority to enter Mr. Ortiz's property, change his locks, or move into his residence. Good faith is not a defense when your actions are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the law. Patricia was bound over for trial on all charges. As we left the courthouse, she shot me a look of pure hatred. "You're going to regret this," she hissed as she passed me. "Is that a threat?" I asked loudly enough that several people, including Deputy Reeves, heard. Her lawyer grabbed her arm and pulled her away before she could say anything else. "She's losing it," David said quietly. "That works in our favor." The civil trial was scheduled for January. I spent December trying to return to normal life, but it was hard. Every time I was at the cabin, I was hyper-aware of every sound, every car that drove past. I'd installed security cameras around the property and I checked the footage obsessively. 2 weeks before Christmas, I got a call from Frank, my neighbor. "William, you need to get up here right now. Patricia's at your cabin." "What? How?" "There's a restraining order." "I don't know, but she's here with some kind of work crew. They've got a truck and tools." I was in Charlotte at my regular job, about 2 hours away. "I'm calling the sheriff." "Don't confront her yourself." "Already called them." "Just wanted to give you a heads up." I left work immediately and made the drive in record time, calling David Winters on the way to let him know what was happening. When I pulled up to the cabin, there were 2 sheriff's vehicles in the driveway, and Deputy Reeves was talking to Patricia and 3 men in work clothes. "I have every right to be here," Patricia was saying loudly. "This property is within HOA jurisdiction, and we're making safety repairs." "Madam, you're in violation of a restraining order," Deputy Reeves said with remarkable patience. "You need to leave immediately, or I'll have to arrest you." "This is ridiculous. The restraining order is invalid because it's based on false premises. My lawyer is filing to have it dismissed." "Until it's dismissed, you have to follow it. That's how restraining orders work." I got out of my truck and walked over. Patricia saw me and her face contorted with rage. This is all your fault. You're destroying our community with your selfishness." "Get off my property," I said coldly. "It's not your property. It belongs to the HOA, madam." "That's enough," Deputy Reeves said. "You're under arrest for violation of a restraining order." What happened next was almost comical. Patricia tried to run. She actually kicked off her heels and tried to sprint across my yard toward the woods. She made it about 20 feet before Deputy Reeves and another deputy caught up with her. She struggled and screamed the whole time they were putting handcuffs on her. This is police brutality. "I'm being persecuted for trying to maintain property values. You're all going to be sued." They loaded her into the back of a patrol car, still screaming. The work crew had already fled, leaving their truck behind. What were they doing? I asked Deputy Reeves after Patricia was secured in the vehicle. "Near as I can tell, they were going to force entry into your cabin. We got here before they could actually break in, but they had crowbars and a drill." She told them she had authorization from the county, which was a lie. So she was going to break in again, even with criminal charges pending and a restraining order in place. Apparently. I think she's having some kind of breakdown. She's not thinking rationally. Patricia spent the night in jail. Her lawyer got her out the next morning, but the damage was done. The violation of the restraining order meant the judge revoked her bail on the original charges, and she was remanded to custody until trial. That's when things got really interesting. Sitting in jail, Patricia apparently decided to flip on the other HOA board members. She told the prosecutor that the other board members had known about her seizure plan and had helped her change my locks. She provided emails and text messages proving her claims. Within a week, 2 other board members were charged with conspiracy to commit criminal trespass. The HOA dissolved itself in an emergency vote, with the remaining members scrambling to distance themselves from Patricia's actions. The trial was moved up to mid-January due to Patricia's custody status. It was held in the Watauga County Courthouse, and once again, the gallery was packed. This time, there were even reporters from the local news stations. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecutor laid out a clear timeline of Patricia's actions. Her decision to target my property, the fake violation notices, the illegal seizure order, changing my locks, moving my furniture, living in my cabin for 4 days, and then violating the restraining order. They had photos, documents, and testimony from multiple witnesses, including Deputy Reeves, the county clerk, and Donald Fraser, the former HOA board member. Patricia's defense was essentially that she believed she had the authority to do what she did based on the HOA bylaws. Her lawyer tried to paint her as an overzealous volunteer who'd made an honest mistake. This was no mistake, Prosecutor Morrison said in her closing argument. Miss Henderson knew exactly what she was doing. She targeted Mr. Ortiz's property because he was out of town and couldn't defend it. She falsified documents, lied to contractors, and when she was caught, she tried to do it again. This is a clear case of someone who believed she was above the law. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Patricia was found guilty on all counts: criminal trespass, breaking and entering, theft, and violation of a restraining order. At sentencing 2 weeks later, Judge Pierce didn't hold back. Miss Henderson, your actions represent a fundamental disrespect for property rights and the rule of law. You used your position in the HOA to target a homeowner who couldn't defend himself, and you continued your illegal actions even after being warned by law enforcement. The court sentences you to 18 months in prison, with credit for time served. You'll also pay full restitution to Mr. Ortiz for all damages and legal fees, which the court calculates at $67,000. Patricia's face went white. Your Honor, I can't possibly. You should have thought of that before you broke into someone's home and stole their property, Judge Pierce said sharply. Bailiff, remand the defendant to custody. As Patricia was led away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that this nightmare was finally over, but sadness that it had come to this. I'd never wanted to send anyone to prison. I just wanted to protect my property. The civil trial happened in March. By that point, Patricia had no fight left in her. Her lawyer negotiated a settlement where she admitted fault and agreed to pay an additional $30,000 in damages. The HOA's insurance covered part of it, but Patricia was personally on the hook for most of the money. By the time everything was settled, it was April. The mountains were coming back to life after a long winter, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. My cabin was mine, fully and completely. There was no HOA, no Patricia, no threats hanging over my head. I spent a long weekend at the cabin, just sitting on the deck and watching the sunset over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Frank came by on Saturday with a case of beer, and we spent the evening talking about everything that had happened. You know, you're a legend up here now, Frank said, laughing. People call you the guy who beat the HOA Karen. There's a rumor someone's going to write a book about it. I hope not. I just want to move on. I get that. But you did something important, William. Patricia was terrorizing people up here for years. Old Henry, the Johnsons, the Caldwells, all those folks she wrote bogus violations against. You stood up to her, and now people don't have to be afraid anymore. I didn't do it to be a hero. I did it because she literally stole my house. I know, but you're a hero anyway, deal with it. We clinked beer bottles and watched the stars come out. It had been a long, exhausting fight, but I'd won. My cabin was safe, and Patricia Henderson was going to spend the next year and a half thinking about what she'd done. The following week, I returned to Charlotte to focus on my regular job. I worked as a wildlife biologist for the state, which was what had taken me to Alaska in the first place. I'd been studying migration patterns of caribou herds, completely disconnected from civilization for a month. If someone had told me that during that time, an HOA Karen would seize my cabin and I'd end up in a criminal trial, I never would have believed them. But life has a way of throwing curveballs. The important thing was how you dealt with them. I dealt with mine by standing my ground, hiring a good lawyer and trusting the legal system to work. And despite all my cynicism, it had actually worked. In May, I got a letter from Patricia's lawyer. She'd been released to a work release program, and was working 3 jobs to try to pay off the restitution she owed me. The letter was clearly written by her lawyer, but it included a personal note at the end in Patricia's handwriting. "I'm sorry for what I did. I lost sight of what mattered and hurt people in the process. I hope someday you can forgive me." I stared at that note for a long time. Part of me was still angry at her for violating my space and causing me months of stress and expense. But another part of me felt pity. She'd thrown away her reputation, her freedom, and her financial security because she couldn't let go of control. I didn't write back. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I might never be. But I did file the letter away in the folder with all the other documents from the case. Maybe someday I'd look back on all of this and feel differently. Summer came, and I fell back into my normal routine of spending weekends at the cabin. I'd installed better locks, kept the security cameras running, and made friends with more of my neighbors. The Mountainside Estates area was quieter now, more peaceful. Without Patricia driving around looking for violations, people relaxed and enjoyed their properties. In late June, Donald Fraser invited me to a community barbecue at his place. About 20 neighbors showed up, and it was the first time I'd met many of them. They all had stories about Patricia, ridiculous violations she'd written, threats she'd made, fees she'd invented. One woman, Sarah, had been fined $500 because Patricia claimed her wind chimes were too loud. Another man, Robert, had been threatened with legal action because his firewood pile was supposedly an eyesore. "She was obsessed with control," Donald said as we stood around his fire pit. "It wasn't really about property values or community standards. It was about power. She wanted to be in charge of everything, and she couldn't handle anyone questioning her authority. What I don't understand is why the other board members went along with it," I said. "Fear, mostly," Donald replied. "She was incredibly good at making people think she knew what she was doing. She'd throw around legal terms and wave documents around, and people assumed she must be right. By the time anyone realized she was making stuff up, they were already implicated. The 2 board members who got charged, what happened with them? They took plea deals, community service, and probation. They cooperated fully with the prosecution, which is probably why Patricia ended up with a harsher sentence. They had emails from her specifically instructing them to target your property and making it clear she knew it was questionable legally. So she knew all along that what she was doing was illegal. Oh yeah, she absolutely knew. She just thought she could get away with it. As the summer wore on, I found myself spending more and more time at the cabin. The ordeal with Patricia had reminded me why I loved this place so much. It was my refuge, my escape from the stress of everyday life. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. In August, I got a call from David Winters, my lawyer. "Good news," he said. "Patricia's made a significant payment toward your restitution, about $20,000. She apparently sold her house to help cover it." Wow, I didn't expect that. She's taking it seriously. Her lawyer says she's genuinely remorseful and wants to make things right. The remaining balance is being paid in monthly installments from her wages. That's good, I guess. I mean, I'm glad she's taking responsibility. There's something else. Her lawyer asked if you'd be willing to provide a letter to the parole board when she comes up for early release consideration in about 6 months. You'd be under no obligation to support her release, but they wanted to know if you'd be willing to provide input. I'll think about it. I did think about it. A lot. Part of me wanted Patricia to serve every single day of her sentence. She'd put me through hell, cost me tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, and violated the sanctity of my home. But another part of me recognized that she was already facing severe consequences. Her reputation was destroyed. She'd lost her home, and she'd spent months in jail. At some point, punishment becomes vengeance, and I didn't want to be driven by vengeance. In September, I went back to Alaska for another research trip. This time, I made sure everyone knew where I was going and when I'd be back. I even gave Frank a key to my cabin, with explicit written permission to check on the place while I was gone. I wasn't taking any chances. The trip was successful, and when I returned in early October, my cabin was exactly as I'd left it. Frank had checked on it twice a week, and even brought in my mail from the P.O. box. It was a relief to have neighbors I could trust. One evening in mid-October, as I was sitting on my deck watching the leaves change colors, I decided to write the letter for Patricia's parole hearing. I kept it factual and unemotional. I acknowledged the harm she'd caused me, but also noted that she was making restitution payments and seemed to be taking responsibility for her actions. I didn't explicitly support her release, but I didn't oppose it either. I figured I'd let the parole board make their own decision based on all the evidence. David submitted the letter on my behalf, and I didn't hear anything more about it for months. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. November came, and I found myself approaching the 1-year anniversary of the day I'd come home to find Patricia in my cabin. It felt surreal to think about how much had happened in just a year. A criminal trial, a civil lawsuit, thousands of dollars in legal fees, and months of stress. But I'd survived it. More than survived it, actually. I'd won. The week before Thanksgiving, Deputy Reeves called me. "William, I thought you should know. Patricia Henderson was released on parole yesterday. She served about 10 months total between pretrial detention and her sentence." "Okay. Thanks for letting me know. I don't think you have anything to worry about. Her parole conditions are strict, and one of them is that she's not allowed within 2 miles of your property, but I wanted you to be aware. I appreciate it." That night, I lay in bed in my cabin, thinking about Patricia. She was out of jail now, trying to rebuild her life. I wondered if she'd learned anything, if she genuinely regretted what she'd done, or if she was just bitter about getting caught. I'd probably never know. What I did know was that this cabin was mine. It would always be mine. No HOA, no Karen, no one could take that away from me. I'd fought for it, defended it, and won. And that victory, hard-earned as it was, meant something. Thanksgiving came, and I invited Frank and a few other neighbors over for dinner. We ate turkey and stuffing on my deck, wrapped in blankets against the November chill, and talked about how grateful we were for the peace and quiet of mountain life. "You know what I'm thankful for?" Frank said, raising his beer. "I'm thankful that William here had the guts to stand up to Patricia and end her reign of terror." To William. Everyone raised their glasses and echoed the toast. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but also with pride. I'd done something difficult, and it had made a difference not just for me, but for the whole community. As winter settled over the mountains, I found myself thinking about the future. This whole experience had taught me some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation, and about how systems like HOAs could be abused by people with the wrong motivations. I also thought about forgiveness. I still wasn't sure if I'd truly forgiven Patricia for what she'd done. Maybe forgiveness wasn't really the right word. Acceptance was probably better. I accepted that it had happened. I accepted that she was a flawed person who'd made terrible choices, and I accepted that the legal system had held her accountable. That was enough. December brought heavy snow to the mountains. I spent my weekends at the cabin, chopping firewood, reading by the fireplace, and enjoying the solitude. One particularly cold evening, as I was adding logs to the fire, I heard a vehicle struggling up the mountain road. The sound grew closer, and then there was silence. Curious, I put on my coat and boots and walked out to the road. About a quarter-mile down, a small car had slid into a ditch. The driver was still in the vehicle, and as I approached with my flashlight, I saw it was a woman about my age, looking frustrated and cold. "Need help?" I called out. "Oh, thank God," she said, rolling down her window. "I've been stuck here for 20 minutes. My phone has no signal." "Yeah, service is spotty up here. Let me see if I can help you out." I got my truck and a tow strap, and after about 15 minutes of careful maneuvering, I managed to pull her car out of the ditch. She was incredibly grateful, and I could see she was shivering. "You should come up to my cabin and warm up before you try to drive down the mountain," I offered. "The road's only going to get worse as it gets colder." "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "It's no imposition. I'm William, by the way." "Olivia," she said, shaking my hand with cold fingers. "Olivia Foster." We drove up to my cabin and I got her settled by the fire with hot coffee. She explained that she was a freelance writer who'd rented a cabin about 3 miles up the mountain for a month to work on a book. "I'm writing about mountain communities and sustainable living," she said, "but I'm clearly not prepared for mountain winters." We talked for a couple hours, and I found myself genuinely enjoying her company. She was smart, funny, and had a way of asking questions that showed she was really listening to the answers. When the conversation turned to local history, I ended up telling her about the whole Patricia Henderson saga. "That's insane," Olivia said, shaking her head. "So she literally just moved into your cabin while you were gone, changed the locks, redecorated the whole thing. It was surreal. And she went to jail for it, served 10 months, just got out on parole last month." "That must have been incredibly stressful for you." "It was, but it taught me a lot about standing up for yourself and not backing down when you know you're right." We talked until nearly midnight, and by then the snow had stopped. I offered to follow her down the mountain to make sure she got to her rental safely, and she gratefully accepted. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and I became friends. She'd stop by my cabin a few times a week, ostensibly to interview me for her book, but really just to talk. I found myself looking forward to her visits, and when she invited me to her rental for dinner one evening, I accepted without hesitation. As Christmas approached, I realized I was happier than I'd been in years. The nightmare with Patricia was behind me. I had good neighbors. My cabin was truly mine, and I'd met someone who seemed to genuinely understand me. On Christmas Eve, Olivia and I went for a hike in the snow-covered woods near my cabin. The world was silent and white, and our breath made clouds in the cold air. "I'm glad your car slid into that ditch," I said as we walked. She laughed. "That's an odd thing to be glad about." "You know what I mean. I'm glad we met." "Me too," she said and squeezed my hand. We stood there in the snow, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the trees, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The cabin behind us was warm and safe, truly mine in every sense. The past year had been one of the hardest of my life, but I'd come through it stronger and with a clearer sense of what mattered. As we walked back to the cabin, Olivia asked me about my plans for the new year. "Honestly, I'm just going to focus on the simple things," I said. "My work, this place, spending time with people I care about. No drama, no legal battles, just living life." That sounds perfect. And it was. The story of HOA Karen Patricia Henderson seizing my cabin had come to an end, but my story was just continuing. I'd learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, that the system can work if you're persistent, and that even the darkest situations can lead to unexpected positive outcomes. New Year's came, and I spent it at the cabin with Olivia and a few neighbors. We built a bonfire, roasted marshmallows, and watched the stars. At midnight, as everyone cheered and hugged, I looked around at these people who'd become my community and felt genuinely grateful. Patricia Henderson had tried to take my cabin, but in the end, she'd failed. More than that, her actions had actually brought the community closer together. Without the oppressive HOA, without the constant threat of violations and fines, people were free to be themselves and to be good neighbors to each other. In January, I got the final restitution payment from Patricia. With it came a short note. "I know I can never undo what I did, but I hope this helps close that chapter. I'm working on being a better person. Thank you for giving me that chance." I filed the note with all the other documents and closed the folder for the last time. That chapter was indeed closed. Whatever Patricia did with the rest of her life was up to her. I had my own life to live. Spring came early that year, and the mountains exploded with color. Olivia finished her book and decided to stay in North Carolina, renting a small house in Boone. Our friendship had grown into something more, and while neither of us was rushing anything, it felt right. One warm April evening, Olivia and I were sitting on my deck watching the sunset when she asked me if I'd ever consider getting involved in local government. "After everything that happened with the HOA, you understand how important good governance is," she said. "The county could use someone like you, someone who cares about property rights and fairness." "I don't know. I like my quiet life. Think about it. You could make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else." I did think about it, and in May, I attended my first county commissioners' meeting as an observer. The experience was eye-opening. I saw how decisions were made, how regulations were created, and how much influence engaged citizens could have. By summer, I was regularly attending meetings and had even joined a committee focused on property rights and HOA regulation. We were working on new county ordinances that would require HOAs to follow stricter procedures before taking any action against properties, including mandatory court oversight for liens and seizures. "You're doing important work," Frank told me one Saturday as we fished at a nearby lake. "That ordinance you're working on could protect a lot of people. It's the least I can do. I had the resources to fight back against Patricia. Not everyone does." The ordinance passed in August with unanimous support from the county commissioners. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it added important safeguards that would make it much harder for another Patricia Henderson to abuse her power. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn again, I found myself reflecting on the past 2 years. So much had happened, so much had changed. But through it all, my cabin had remained constant. It was still my refuge, my place of peace, my home. Olivia moved in with me that October. We'd talked about it for months, and it felt like the natural next step. She set up a writing space in the spare bedroom, and I built her a desk overlooking the mountains. Watching her work there, completely absorbed in her writing, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced before. In November, on the second anniversary of the day I'd come home to find Patricia in my cabin, Olivia and I hosted a community gathering. About 30 neighbors showed up, and we spent the evening sharing food, stories, and laughter. Donald Fraser stood up at one point and proposed a toast. 2 years ago, our community was held hostage by fear and arbitrary rules, he said. One man had the courage to stand up and fight back, and because of that, we're all freer today. To William, everyone raised their glasses, and I felt embarrassed but also proud. I'd never set out to be a hero or a community leader. I just wanted to protect what was mine. But sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for others too. As winter settled in once more, I spent my evenings by the fire with Olivia, reading and talking about our plans for the future. We talked about maybe building an addition to the cabin, about my work with the county, about her next book project. We talked about everything and nothing, the way people do when they're comfortable with each other. One snowy evening in December, Olivia surprised me with a gift. It was a wooden sign that read, "Ortiz Cabin established 2017, defended 2024. "I had it made," she said. "I hope you like it." "I love it," I said, and I meant it. That sign represented everything I'd been through and everything I'd won. We hung it on the front porch, right next to the door. Every time I came home after that, I'd see it and remember that this place was mine, truly and completely mine. No one could take it from me ever again. The years that followed were peaceful. Patricia Henderson faded into memory, a cautionary tale about what happens when power goes to someone's head. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Florida and was working as a hotel manager. I hoped she'd found peace and learned from her mistakes. As for me, I found my purpose in protecting others from experiencing what I'd gone through. The HOA oversight ordinance I'd helped create became a model for other counties in North Carolina. I was invited to speak at local government conferences, sharing my story and advocating for stronger property rights protections. But more than any of that, I found happiness. Happiness in my relationship with Olivia, in my work, in my community, and in my cabin. The place that Patricia had tried to steal had become even more precious to me because I'd fought for it and won. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd stand on my deck and look out at the dark mountains. I'd think about everything that had happened, about how close I'd come to losing this place, and about how the legal system had ultimately worked the way it was supposed to. I'd think about Patricia sitting in jail, about the moment the sheriff had locked her out of my cabin in the cold, about justice being served. And then I'd go back inside, where Olivia was sleeping peacefully in our bed, where the fire was crackling softly in the hearth, where everything was warm and safe and mine. I'd fought for this, and I'd won. And that victory, hard-earned and well-deserved, would stay with me forever. The story of HOA Karen Patricia Henderson and how she tried to seize my cabin had a definitive ending. She went to jail, paid restitution, and faced the consequences of her actions. The HOA dissolved, the community healed, and new protections were put in place to prevent it from happening again. But my story didn't end there. It continued day by day, in the life I built in that cabin and in the relationships I formed with my neighbors and with Olivia. Patricia had tried to take my home, but in the end, she'd only made me appreciate it more and fight harder to protect it. And on cold winter nights when the snow was falling and the fire was burning and Olivia was curled up next to me reading a book, I'd look around at everything I had and everything I'd fought for, and I'd smile. Because this was mine. All mine. And no HOA Karen could ever take it away.